I'm Mike, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make a breakfast nook banquette just like this with materials from Home Depot.
Alright, so the whole point of this build was my partner and I, we live in an older house. I had recently redone the kitchen floor, and the prices of banquettes like the one I just made were kind of ridiculous online. We're talking like $2,500 to $3,000. So this build used about 8 2x4s, 1 sheet of 3/4 inch plywood, 1 sheet of 1/2 inch plywood, and then about 4 or 5 pieces of 3.5 inch maple finished on all 4 sides trim, a bunch of nails, and some wood glue. So all in all, this cost me about $500 to build, and this first step here is just me cutting out the 2x4s I need to build the frame of the box, which is kind of the whole foundation of this whole build. It's a simple box made out of 2x4s that then I dress up and make to look pretty nice. So yeah, this is the first step. I just pre-cut everything to the lengths I needed. Obviously, if you do this yourself, the lengths are going to depend on the space, but mine was about 64 inch on the long side and 30 something on the short side. So here I'm using wood glue before screwing together the base of this side of the breakfast nook. Looking back, I don't know how important the wood glue would have been. I figured that since this was the structural frame of this whole seating area, it would be important, but as you'll see later in the video, I end up putting a bunch of plywood on this as well. So I'm testing everything with my combination square, which, thinking back, is kind of funny considering that if I cut all these pieces to the same length, which I did, it would be square. But this is my first time doing something like this, and I'm building it in the kitchen where it's going to sit. So took a couple extra steps just to make sure, at least in my mind, everything was happening the way it should. This is the other thing. I think that videos like this would be helpful. I know, myself included, I don't have a shop or a garage big enough to assemble this type of thing and bring it into my house. So I just had the cardboard underneath to make sure any glue squeeze out doesn't ruin my brand new vinyl tile floors. So yeah, just something to think about. I was very careful with things like squeeze out and stain and glue and all that. But building it in the place that it was going to live was kind of the only option for me. And I'd be curious if that's the same situation you guys are in. So this second part here, I'm just building the top part of the box on top of the bottom part just to make sure that they're, roughly, not roughly, but pretty close to being the exact same dimensions, because as you'll see in just a minute, that top box is going to be kind of suspended about a foot, or the height of my bench, above the bottom, and that's where all the finished pieces are going to attach to, right? It's also going to be where most of the weight from people sitting on this banquette are sitting. So I just wanted to make sure that it all lined up. First screws here, so plywood, or excuse me, 2x4s here. These are about 1.5 inches thick. So I think I was using 2.5 inch screws for the frame here. I think that's more than enough, especially given how this thing was all put together. I think it was just fine. Yeah, so I just put 2 screws on each long piece to connect to the end boards there. I think that's perfectly fine. And just wrapping this up, all in all, up to this point in the video, I think I've probably been at it for about an hour. If I were to guess what the total time start to finish took to make this, excluding trips to the hardware store and driving to my dad's place to borrow some tools. Probably about 6 hours from start to finish, which I think is not bad considering, in my mind, saving about $2,000 or more by building this versus buying it. And I know you could probably say that I could find something like this for cheaper, which is exactly what I had before from Wayfair, but it fell apart after 2 years. So there's that. Here, what I'm doing is I'm just screwing in the pre-cut riser pieces for this box that I cut them in my backyard. So these are all exactly the same length. I basically measured them from the floor to the height that I wanted the bench to be, factoring in the fact that my bench top was going to be 3/4 inch plywood. I think in total this is about 18 inches. I basically made it the same height as the rest of the chairs in my kitchen. So I'm just screwing these all in, and you'll see you can kind of start picturing it right now. That top box that I made is going to slide around these 4 risers, and I'm going to attach them together, and basically that's going to allow the top and bottom box to be flat surfaces to mount the outward facing parts of this breakfast nook that people are going to see. And also in doing that, it's going to help secure and firm up the overall structure of this bench, because the plywood I'm using is pretty thick. And to give you an example, the banquette that I had torn out to put this one in from Wayfair, the sheathing that was going around it, like basically the exterior of this thing, was like a 1/4 inch plywood. It was super thin. I'm going to be using 1/2 inch on this one, and then my bench top is going to be 3/4 of an inch, whereas the one that I had previously from Wayfair was only a 1/2 inch. So yeah, there's just me asking my partner there to grab me my triangle. But yeah, I think this is going to be way stronger. And the kicker, this is the real crazy part about this, I paid probably the same for the Wayfair bench than the cost it took me to build this one. I still had to assemble it, although that bench was all dowels and really short, like 1.5 inch screws. I think that the extra time and effort spent planning and building this is really going to pay off, and I think you'll agree as the video goes on. So here I decided to put supports in the middle as well, just to give the bench something to rest on, because me myself, I'm like 225 pounds. I'll probably be sitting in the middle. I don't want it to bow. And yeah, here I'm just sliding this on, and I'm using just a little DeWalt clamp to hold it up on one end so that I can find, level enough, and then start securing this so it's at the exact same height as the top of each of those 2x4 posts that are holding this top section up. So I just rested the level there on the back. I think I did three screws on each of these posts, more than enough. And as you'll notice, I stopped using glue. I guess as I was working through the project, I realized that putting glue into all the framing bits probably just a waste of glue and a waste of time. So I'm just screwing all these in. And you'll notice I moved that with my hand. I mean, this thing's level enough. My floor in this kitchen isn't perfectly level, so I'm just trying to make sure that the surface of this is relatively level. And it came out just fine. Yeah, so just finishing up here. One of the things that I found actually doing this in my house, in my kitchen where it's going to sit, there's a little bit more scurrying around, all my tools are in my basement. If I forgot something, up and down the stairs. So just keep that in mind. So here I'm putting together the other section of the banquette. So this one's a lot shorter. So the idea here is I'm gonna build the box same as I did for the other side, screw it to the existing box, the bigger box, And then I'm going to have, a little nice L shape in the corner of the room, both with storage, and both pretty sturdy and secure. So I made the second box, you'll notice, not as wide, like it's not as deep to the wall. And the reason I did that is like the first box I built a little oversized, just to give us more storage. We don't have the biggest kitchen. We have like one wall of pantries and then under the sink and stuff, so really wanted storage. But also we put in a circular table here, so I figured that by making the smaller side, which would really only probably seat one person unless it's like two small kids, making it a little less deep would allow me to push the table further into this in that back wall, giving us a little bit more room in the rest of the kitchen while still having seating that can seat somebody. Now, I don't know if this is, like, I've never built furniture before. I don't know if this is a faux pas or if both sides are supposed to be the same depth. But if you know better than me, let me know if I made a mistake doing this. But I'm happy with it so far. So, yeah, just finishing up putting these screws in, and it's the exact same process as the box before. And I mean, if you get the idea at this point, just skip forward to the next part of the build, because I didn't really cut out much of the build for this, just to give everyone a pretty good idea of what this process actually looks like. I think a lot of the videos I watch, and videos that I love to watch, it's like a 3-minute video and then you have this masterpiece. But I learn by doing, and I don't know much on my own. So for the same reason I watch tutorial videos that show the whole process, I'm leaving all this stuff in this video just to help everybody figure it out. And there you go. So you just pop that top on. Nice. Get the clamp back out. Make sure everything's nice and level. Even just looking at it looks awesome. And then throw some screws in there. And then box portion of this is pretty much complete. Yeah, so these ones here, I just came in from the inside. I probably should have just come from the outside like I did on the other one, but whatever. Okay. So, now we're cutting the bench top and the sides. For this, I'm using a track saw, and my patio chairs are kind of my workbench extension there. You don't need to use a Festool saw. If any of you saw the green track in the back, this is not mine. This is my dad's. Bought it for him for his 60th birthday. I don't have a table saw. I'm kind of terrified to use one until I can afford a saw stop or something like that. So I'm using his saw, and it's my first time ever using a track saw. So this first cut took me a bit of time. And watching this back, I probably should have cut from the other side, so the bulk of the saw would be on the solid surface, but that's me learning. One thing I can say, though, is as long as you're lining up this track along your cut line, this saw, and I'm not sure if other track saws are like this, had such good grip without clamping it to the wood that it didn't really move. Like, the saw powered through the plywood, and the track stayed straight, as you can see here. Really nice cuts. Like, they were super clean. And I just came out a couple times that I didn't show on video, just to shave off. Like, this is one of the shaves where I cut all of these a little bit big, because I figured, the 3/4 inch sheet was $110. The 1/2 inch sheet was like $86. I didn't want to have to run back to Home Depot for more plywood just because I made the mistake of cutting something too short. So what I'm doing here is I'm just taking this for the height of the bench. I just used a piece that I had already cut and made sure was the right height to mark that line. And more cutting. I use the triangle on the flat edge to start the line for the cross cut. I think it's a little bit more accurate for me, at least, to line up the track on a 6-inch line versus just 2 dots on each side. Yeah. One cool thing with this saw that you saw right there is I plunged it in a little bit too far away from the edge. There's actually a little window on the side that lets you see where it's going to plunge into, so you know exactly where the cut's going to start. Just a little helpful tip I discovered going through this. Okay, so this is kind of the dry fit of what this is going to look like. Now, I'm now using, I think they're 1.5 inches. They're actually drywall screws. I didn't do this for any particular reason. I only had, at this point, 2.5 inch or 3-inch deck screws in my basement, and I found this old box of drywall screws. I was like, this should work. And then after the fact, there was another video on YouTube that I was watching of a guy building a similar bench, and he told me that, or told everyone, his viewers, that he loved using drywall guns and drywall screws for things like this. So kind of made me feel better in the end that I didn't screw up using the wrong screws. But yeah, as you can see, I'm just running these screws along those top beams that I put together in the box. And this is what I mean, like, this is pretty thick plywood. This is going to add so much strength to this box, right? Like, that's why I was so intrigued to do this build versus the cheapo Wayfair bench I had before. Just as I was kind of sketching up the plans and looking at other videos of guys making boxes and benches like this thing is rock solid. So yeah, and the screws you're not going to see. So I'm just running them along that top, and I'm going to actually build like a shaker style trim for this box out of S4S maple, which is basically maple planks. They're going to be 3.5 inches. It's like stuff you'd use for molding and trim, but it's finished on 4 sides. So I wanted to make this as easy as possible. The plywood's been sanded, the trim's sanded, everything sanded. I actually didn't do any sanding other than for the bench top on this, and I'll talk a little bit about more of my thoughts of that down the road. But the goal was to make this look as good as possible, as cheap as possible, and as easy as possible. Now this is me cutting those trim pieces. I probably look like an amateur here. I don't use my miter saw that much for making 45-degree cuts, but just wanted to make sure I didn't cut too much off, didn't cut my fingers off, and was left with a nice clean cut. And it actually, my little Ryobi was working out pretty well. One thing to mention, as I went through this process, I did a lot of measuring twice, 3 times, 4 times, cutting once, just because I'm in Canada. Like, to give you an example, each of these 8-foot pieces of trim were about $30, right? So one mistake can cost, quite a bit. So here I'm actually using wood glue again, and just this is my 18 gauge nailer. I think I was using like 1.5 inch brad nails. But the idea here, I got this from that other video I was talking about, is he makes a good point. Like this molding, this trim, this shaker pattern, whatever you want to call it, people are going to be slamming their heels against it. Chairs are going to be bumping into it. I really didn't have the confidence that brad nails would be enough to keep this thing nice and tight. So I figured just a little strip of wood glue on each one would probably go a long way for me. And didn't make a mess. I made sure to just kind of apply the glue to the top, middle to the top section, so it didn't bleed out onto my floor, because this is just floating on my kitchen floor. And they all went together pretty nicely. One thing I learned through this process, these 45-degree miters, there's always a little gap, right? There was another video I watched online where people actually, I think they were saying they cut them a little bit more than 45 degree, like a degree more, and it kind of helps eliminate that that gap. I didn't do it for this one. I was too scared to ruin the material on my first try, so I just went with 45 degree cuts and then cleaned it up with some wood filler later. So yeah, as I install these, you'll see, like I said, it's covering all the screw holes, and also on that side there where you see the exposed plywood, that's going to get fixed up too, because I'm going to be putting some of this trim going vertical up and down around that corner. It's going to look really nice. Again, using that clamp just to hold this in place. I didn't want to have to peel these off and redo them, so I just wanted to make sure they were lined up with the top of the bench and with the other pieces of trim that they were mating themselves to. Same thing for the other side. I didn't miter them in the corners. I don't know if that's something that furniture makers do. If anyone can comment on that. I just did a straight cut where it meets there in the corner bit with the other box. That kind of made the most sense to me. If anybody knows better, please pipe up and let me know. But that's what I did. I think it looked fine. Just wiping off all the squeeze out after I installed these because I didn't want it to ruin the finish after. But yeah, so at this point I was probably like 3.5 hours in, let's call it, and as you're seeing here, starting to look like a piece of furniture and not just not plywood, 2x4 frame, which I thought was pretty cool for an amateur. Oh, here, the absolute last brad nail I shot in, I hit a screw and it just balled up and I had to pull it out with pliers. Kind of a pain, but I guess it happens. So these are the riser pieces. In the corners, so like I said, I don't have a table saw. I wanted them to be the same width coming out of each corner. So as you can see, this one's overhanging on the left side there. I had to make a cut to fix this. This is probably the sketchiest part of this because I didn't have a table saw. I had ruined my circular saw blade and had already cut these pieces, so they're kind of small and sketchy to do with a circular saw. So I cut these on my miter saw and then finished them with a jigsaw. Would not recommend. I would just cut them to width when you have a longer piece, or with a table saw, whatever you want, and do it the safe way because I was a little sketched out. So this is just me cutting the bench top. By this point I was feeling a lot more confident with the track saw, and honestly I gotta get one of these, whether it's Festool or another brand. They're absolutely amazing. I was so impressed with the quality of the cuts that they were making. Yeah, right there I was just measuring the width that the bench needs to be and just marking it with I guess I could have marked it with the track, but I guess my level was easier straight edge to use. Again, I'm cutting these a little bit big because like this is like a $65 piece of a 4x8 3/4 inch sheet of plywood. I didn't want to screw it up, so I cut them a little big, went in, did test fitting, and then trimmed them, which was really easy to do with the track saw, to size, just to make sure that they both fit and were square. Because remember, this is like an 80-plus-year-old house that I'm installing this in. None of my walls are square or flat or any of that. So once these went in, considering the wall is the only flat surface behind these things, you just want to make sure that they're in their space square. Otherwise they look a little weird with, different size gaps on each end. It just wasn't great. So I cut this out and then cut it to size based on the angle of the wall. Yeah, I probably should have used dust collection. And this is what I mean. So as you can see, I'm just wiggling this thing around. My goal was to get like an 1/8 of an inch gap on the front and the left side. And then same thing for that smaller piece, 1/8 of an inch gap on the left, front, and right side. I didn't really care about the back of the big piece against the wall. So I cut that to size and it fit. Now here I'm just filling everything with wood glue. I've seen, or excuse me, not wood glue, wood filler. I've seen other YouTubers, more experienced woodworkers than me, if you even want to call me that, doing this with sawdust and wood glue. I just didn't want to make a mess on my kitchen floor because I literally had just installed this floor 2 days prior. I wanted something easy, so this stuff's super easy. This is DAP brand. I'll put a link to all this stuff in the description, but I just worked it in with my finger, and how I mentioned earlier, I didn't do much sanding. I just sanded this by hand with a ripped off sheet of 320 or 150. It was I think it was 320 or 220, 320 grit sandpaper, just to smooth it out, because I'm not sure how well this stuff stains, but I imagine it's going to look funky compared to the grain of the wood, since this whole thing is either maple trim or maple plywood, right? So I wanted the grain pattern to kind of be consistent and not have any janky looking wood filled sections covered in stain. This takes a little bit of time. I just filled the big gaps. Like, this thing's not going to be perfect. I didn't cover the brad nail holes. I figured they're so small, and honestly, it would be a pain. There's probably 200 brad nails in this thing, and then my fear was you're going to see a little spot of wood filler over every single one after this thing was finished, and I did not want that. I'd rather just see the holes. But if you guys know of a better way, tell me. I might make another one of these things for somebody down the road. Just keeping everything clean so I don't ruin my floor. This is the cool part. So I learned this from a couple other YouTube videos. I was like, how am I going to cover up the plywood around the bench? That looks kind of half-assed if I just left it like that. So this is called edge banding. It's basically like plywood or maple veneer, I guess similar to what the plywood is made of. I just got it on Amazon. 25-foot roll was $20. I don't know if Amazon was the best place to get this, because every 12 or 16 inches you could see where they pieced together different pieces of maple when they were making this thing. So there's that. Doesn't look perfect, but you really just measure this up, snap off the end, iron it on, and then I kind of sanded away or cut off the rest of it. This is a cheap Amazon find. I didn't go to a woodworking store or Lee Valley or anything for this, but I probably would have spent more money on the edge banding if I were to do this again. The glue wasn't that great. As you'll see in a minute, I hit it with the iron quite extensively and then pushed it all down and then let it sit before doing the side piece, because I didn't want to stand this thing up and then the weight of it leaning on the edge on the floor popped this thing off. So it took me a little bit more time. I don't know how durable this is going to be, but it looked good. It matched the tops. It was maple, and it really cleaned up the plywood. As you can see, it looks like I already finished the little one in this video. Yeah, there you go. So that one's ready for sanding. So I just took my little Stanley utility knife and was careful to trim as much off as I could without really gouging the bench top, and it was pretty easy to do. I was using a dull blade. I didn't want to go to the hardware store to buy a new pack, but it worked, and I'm sure there's even easier ways to do this. I don't know what those ways are. So again, if you do, put it in the comments, let me know. But yeah, doing this in my kitchen, this would be so much easier in workshop, but I don't have a really big workshop, and I know a lot of people don't. So this is what it looks like. It's a little janky. I had my girlfriend making dinner in the background and my dog probably crying in the other room, but we found a way. The stuff's kind of messy. You just have all these little strips of veneer on the floor after that clog the vacuum, so just make sure you sweep them up. Yeah, so just finishing that up, and I did the same thing for the other one. I think I lost the footage of me doing this on both. We'll see in just a second. I don't remember. That's the bottom piece of the bench. The plywood's nicer on one side, you'll find, usually. Yeah, we just cut a little piece of fine grit sandpaper and cleaned up the edges. Probably should have did this outside, but it was only a little bit of dust. So I actually, I mentioned I sanded the bench tops. I wanted to be nice and smooth for the people sitting on them. I actually sanded and rounded out these edges even more later in this video with my orbital sander outside, just to make sure it all looked nice. So here I'm just wiping this down with some mineral spirits. I didn't know this. I was just trying to do this with a wet rag and water and wasn't having much luck, but apparently this does a great job cleaning off sawdust and any residue of like the wood filler before you get a stain on this. So one thing that was confusing to me is I felt I was using a lot. Like, it didn't seem like it was saturate. I don't know if it's supposed to saturate the whole surface, but anyways. Here I'm doing a pre-stain, so I went with the Rubio monocoat for the finish. I mean, everyone who makes YouTube videos on woodworking raves about this stuff. So this pre-finish just goes on before the oil 2C mixture, and it just lightens up the wood a little bit more, because some of these tinted finishes don't get it as white as I might have wanted. So this is their Nordic white color. So I'm just buffing this on with a white Scotch-Brite pad, and you're supposed to let it sit for like 5 minutes or so. But for whatever reason, I guess my AC was on, it was dry. This was drying so fast, so I was trying to fly through this because I was afraid that it would start to cure, and then I'd be stuck with like blotchy sections. So scrubbing this on by hand would have been way faster if I had some sort of power buffer or something to do this, but I said I was doing this cheap and easy, or let's just call it cheap, because this was probably harder than using a buffer. It was a bit of a workout. I had to make sure none of my sweat was dripping on this. Who knows what that would have done to it. But yeah, I did the one section at a time, and this is me just wiping it all off and buffing it out with this is just like a cheap cloth. I bought in a pack of like 100 on Amazon. I had to use a couple of them because the cloths were getting saturated. So same thing here with the side. For furniture like this, what I found putting on this pre-coat was the corners were hard to get into. So when I did the actual finish with the oil mixture and accelerator from Rubio monocoat, I actually used a paintbrush to get that into the tight corners, and that saved me a lot of trying to squeeze stuff out with my fingers to get it into the corners there. I just laid down Home Depot contractor bags to protect my floor. This stuff doesn't, you use this, a little bit of this stuff goes a long way, and I'm using it sparingly, so there wasn't a lot of drip. And I think I did get one drip on that back part of the floor there. I just wiped it off right away. And I did the tops too, just because I did not edge band the top of the plywood. That was an afterthought, but as you'll see in the end, it's barely visible. That half-inch plywood I used under the kind of trim pieces, making the shaker pattern there. So this is the final coat. So this is that Rubio monocoat oil plus 2C. This is I think this was cotton white. So you just shake it up really good, and then you mix it to like a 3-to-1 ratio of the finish and this clear accelerator they give you. This stuff was super easy to work with. I bought the 130 mil pack, and that was literally just enough for this. I think I wasted a lot on this furniture part because I didn't use a squeegee. A lot of application videos online say you pour a little bit on and then squeegee it across most of the surface. I did that for the bench tops because I was running dangerously low of this stuff near the end, and that worked really well. But same deal as the pre-stain. So I let it dry for I think like 4.5 hours, and then you just buff it on and then polish it off. This stuff here wasn't drying as fast. I think that's because there's more of an oil in this, but I was just making sure to get this thing really nice and covered. So any spots that I may have missed with the pre-color, this might even it out because they're both white, right? I just wanted to use the pre-color to get it even more white. But you can already see, like, this thing looks whitewashed, and that was the goal. Like, my girlfriend didn't really want, she didn't really want a maple piece of furniture in the kitchen. We have, like, a modern kitchen, and I agree. So, taking that extra step to get this stained up with the pre-color was a good idea. And there you can see I'm just using the paintbrush in all the corners. Again, just one of those cheap little touch-up paintbrushes you get at Home Depot. I think a pack of 3 is like $4. And then back with the Scotch-Brite pad. Really just scrubbing it in. I think I told her to stop talking and recording there. But yeah. So just scrub it in. As you can see, it's already looking nice and white, but swirly, so then you gotta buff it all off. Yeah, and I was putting this on the top too because I figured, I don't know if this would protect the pores of the plywood if someone spills like a drink on this, but I figured why not? The pad was already saturated, might as well. And then this is where some elbow grease comes in. So I did, unlike the pre-color, I did this whole thing at once. So I think this was starting to cure, and I really had to go at this. I was dripping sweat. My shoulders were killing me. I'm out of shape. But yeah, you just get as much. You basically want to get this off. What I read online was until you feel no friction in the cloth passing over the surface. I guess the friction is from the goopy stuff still being on, but basically want to rub it all off. Yeah, this was definitely a bit of elbow grease required, but I think this whole process, getting the Rubio on and wiping it off, was like 25 minutes, 30 minutes max. I love it. Like I've done a couple of like little rinky-dink woodworking projects just with like hand tools, and I used polyurethane or shellac. That stuff reeks. You can't do it in the house. This stuff has 0 VOC, so my dog was in my living room, and this actually smells pretty nice. 0 VOCs, 1 coat. I read after the fact that 2 coats is usually a little bit better. Maybe would have done that next time, but 1 coat, rub it on, rub it off, and you're grooving. Just finishing up this top section. And the top part for when I flip this bench back over. Okay, so this is the bench tops. I'm sanding this with orbital sander. I just drew the pencil lines on. People say that if you do that, it helps you get a nice even sand by sanding until all the pencil marks are gone. And that's exactly what I did here. You'll also see that I drilled 2 holes on each side. Maybe this one was a little bright, but I drilled 2 holes on each side of the bench tops. The idea was I didn't know if I really wanted to do hinges. Color-wise, like my kitchen cabinets have gold handles. The hinges were black or silver, and I would have had to figure out a way to mount them on top because this would have opened into my wall. So I did rope, and you'll see that in a sec. So here I'm just putting some super glue. I noticed, again, this is that cheap Amazon veneer stripping, edge banding. I just wedged in some super glue, pushed it together, and then started sanding it, hoping that the sand from the sanding would get in there. And I think it did. So yeah, this is the kind of a painstaking, not painstaking, this one's too long, but like if you really want to do a proper sand, like this is plywood, so I just did it with like, I think this was 320 again. If I was doing the trim, for example, they say work your way up from like 80 to 150 to whatever finish you want, and that takes a long time sanding. This is so boring sanding, and it's I wasn't wearing a respirator because I was outside, but you really want to make sure this stuff doesn't get in your house or in your ducts or lungs. Really fine stuff. It's not fun. But yeah, just did the surface, cleaned up the handle holes a little bit, and then went around the edge banding one more time, rounded the corners a little bit, and it ended up looking like a solid piece of wood. I was super impressed with what a little bit of $20 Costco, or not Costco, Amazon edge banding can do. Like, look at that. Pretty sweet. It lets you use plywood instead of laminating together a bunch of pieces of wooden maple planks that I don't have a planer to smooth out after. Now this is just the final step, right? Because I did the bench first. Now I'm coloring up the bench top. A lot easier. I just put them on my table, kitchen table, covered with garbage bags, and used two 2x4s to keep this raised so I could get the edges. Really quick, just buffed it all on. I actually read that you can dilute this pre-color with up to like 10% water. And I did that because I was running low and I didn't want to go spend another $30 just to finish these two bench tops. Excuse the little plumber's crack there. This was done in like a 43-degree heat wave, whatever that is in Fahrenheit, but 43 degrees Celsius outside, so I was dying, and with the gloves on, I wasn't adjusting my shorts. Yeah, so just buffing this off. These came out really nice. I think these actually came out nicer than the actual bench part of this build. I think, they were smoother. I sanded them, and they're just a totally flat surface, so it was really smooth sailing at this point. Now time for the big guy, and same deal. And this was, guys, like, when I say perfect, I used 100% of the pre-stain the pre-color, and 100% of the oil plus 2C final coat. So probably should have bought the bigger can just to be safe, but based on the coverage, it said this could cover like 35 to 50 something square feet, and this banquette, all the surface area was not near that, but I guess not using a squeegee for the furniture part, I wasted more than I should have. Yeah, so here I'm just rubbing it on, the edge banding. I was just very careful when I was repositioning this to not touch the sides. I didn't want any fingerprints as this thing started to cure. And so this one was curing super fast. So on that left corner there where the holes are, there was a little stripe of this stuff that was really hard to get off. And if you look closely, you'll be able to tell, like if you're in my house and looking at this thing, but not enough to really bother anybody. And after reading online, this stuff is apparently really easy to touch up. Like I could sand that section down and reapply the finish, and it just kind of all bonds together and looks pretty uniform from what I've read. So that's pretty cool. Alright, last step of the finish. So this is me just mixing in the rest of this accelerant with what I had left of the oil plus 2C stuff. Just dumped out the last little bit. There's the misses in the back. And just shook this up really well. And hoped and prayed that it was enough to finish these two bench tops. But, spoiler alert, it was. Probably should have cut out me shaking this. I wanted to give you guys the full experience. So yeah, this is what I'm talking about with the squeegee. I put so little on, and you just kind of work it all as far around as you can, and then all the remaining edges and spots that you missed, you go with this and spread it all out. on the edges I was a little careful. I didn't know how strong the bond of this veneer was, so I just wanted to make sure I wasn't ripping off the edge banding as I did this, but I didn't, but maybe just be a little careful if you try this. And back to the buffing. I swear my right arm was super worked out after this whole process. This stuff it looks easy, but it's like, it's a repetitive motion. I feel like that was the most tiring part of this whole thing. Last piece, I was so excited at this point. And I also read online that maybe I sanded this too finely. Apparently you only have to go up to like 150, otherwise the pores of the wood get filled with the sawdust. Maybe that's why it looks like it's just kind of floating on top. I don't know. I think it worked out pretty nice, but if any of you have used this Rubio stuff more than once, which is how many times I've used it, let me know. Did I over sand this? But yeah, just working this back in. This piece was kind of a breeze. It was nice and smooth. There was just a couple pieces of like cured finish in the bottle. I guess maybe I got an old bottle. I just made sure to flick that stuff out. Just gotta go over it again to get all those swirl marks out and any residue left over off. Yeah, I was starting to feel it here. I kept readjusting the cloth. My arm's killing me. But you can see how nice this is already looking, right? Like, it's got like a kind of, I don't know if I'd call it eggshell, but it's not quite matte. A little bit less than matte. Looks really nice. Alright, so done with the staining. And the final step was just getting these little rope handles in. So I had to cut out some of the blowout from my drill bit. And I just got this rope from Michael's, which is a craft store here in Canada. It's like, I don't know, $10 for like, I don't know, 20 feet. So I just tied a knot at the end and then underneath and then cut off the excess, and that was this is the idea for how you lift off the bench tops, and this is the final product. What do you guys think?